What is going on, everyone? This is Eric coming at you from just outside of Hartford, Connecticut, and today we are going to continue the Player Bio series as we focus on the life and career of Larry Csonka. Now, Larry Csonka served as a fullback for the majority of his career, and the fullback is a dying, if not dead, position in the NFL. But back during the 40s to probably the 80s, the fullback was a vital part of any NFL offense. Basically, you would line up in the backfield with the running back, or instead of the running back, and you would serve as a short down guy. So on, let's just say 3rd and 1, 4th and goal, they would give you the ball, and your job wasn't necessarily to get 50 yards. Your job was to get the dirty yards, run right up the gut, and get 5 yards. Now, you also would serve as a lead blocker. You didn't need to be a good pass catcher, but you needed to be able to block. So that's what a fullback was. So Larry Csonka would become one of the most feared offensive players in the history of the NFL. Now, his career was not as long as it could have been, but he more than left his mark on the Miami Dolphins franchise, the National Football League as a whole, and in the college football landscape. So without further ado, let's jump right in. Larry Csonka was born on December 25th, 1946 in Stowe, Ohio, which is a suburb of Akron. Now, Csonka, he was clearly a gifted athlete growing up, and he served as the starting defensive end during his sophomore year in high school. During the final year of that season, he ended up fielding a kick. He was out there on special teams, and the ball went right to him. So, while he did not score, running with the football would spark a new interest in Csonka. He stated, quote, "I ran over 2 tacklers before I realized what I was doing. I didn't score or save the game, but I got a tremendous feeling carrying the ball. I was thrashing around, trying to run 6 ways at once. I loved it. I knew then that I wanted to run with the ball." End quote. Now, despite his larger frame, he was able to convince his coaches to play him at the running back position for 2 years. And as he got towards the end of his high school career, he became a very hot commodity for colleges. So he was recruited by many marquee programs, and he ended up settling with the Syracuse Orange. Now, while in Syracuse, he spent his first year as a middle linebacker before making the switch to fullback before his sophomore year. And this position change would work wonders for Csonka and Syracuse as a whole. He had an amazing 3 years as a runner in Syracuse. When he left the school, he held the record for most rushing yards with 2,934 and most yards in a single game with 216. Now, he also averaged 4.9 yards per carry, and he carried the ball 100 plus yards 14 times over his career. As if that is not impressive enough, he split running duties with future Hall of Famer Floyd Little for 2 of those 3 years. And if that doesn't impress you enough, keep in mind that one former alumni of the Syracuse Orange was Jim Brown. So he definitely had some tough competition. So Csonka would enter the 1968 Common Draft, and he would be selected 8th overall by the American Football League's Miami Dolphins. Unfortunately for Csonka, the first 2 years of his career in the NFL were forgettable, to put it nicely. During the 5th game of his career, he hit his head on the ground during a tackle. Now, this knocked him out, left him with a concussion, and forced him to spend 2 days in the hospital. Now, he came back relatively quickly, and only 3 weeks later, he suffered yet another concussion, this time along with a broken nose and a ruptured eardrum. Despite these injuries, he only missed 3 games on that season. Now, he ended the year with 138 carries for 540 yards to go with 6 touchdowns. Now, it should be noted that during his career, the majority of his career, the NFL had a 14-game schedule, not the 16-game schedule that we've had since 1979, nor obviously the 17-game schedule that we are going to have when the 2021 season begins. So, ironically enough, Csonka's last year was in 1979, so he only had a 16-game season for 1 year. So just keep that in mind when we're talking about his stats. They're all 14 years, except 1979. So, unfortunately for Csonka, though, the 1969 season was not too much kinder to him. He once more missed 3 games due to injuries, and his production also dipped. He would carry the ball 131 times for 566 yards, but only scored a pair of touchdowns. Prior to the 1970 season, the Dolphins would hire Shula to coach the team. This would end up being a great move for Larry's career. A former teammate of his, a linebacker named Nick Bonaconti, would state, quote, "There was some question after the 1969 season whether Zonka would ever play fullback again. Not just because of the injuries, but because he didn't play well. ... When Shula came in 1970, he literally had to teach Zonka how to run with the football. He used to run straight up and down, and Shula impressed upon him that he had to lead with his forearm rather than his head. Shula and his backfield coach, Carl Tassef, basically re-engineered Zonka to where he became the Hall of Fame player. Zonka emerged as the offensive leader for the Dolphins," end quote. So in other words, Shula worked his magic and did everything he could to make sure that Zonka could play fullback in the NFL, and it more than worked. So Shula's hire helped Zonka become a better runner and player in general. Starting in 1970, no one would ever question Zonka's toughness again. When I say Zonka was tough, he was tough. In 1970, he received a personal foul as a runner. Say what? Yes, it's true. During a game against the Buffalo Bills, Zonka delivered a forearm shot to an opposing safety that knocked him out cold. This was probably the only time in the history of the league that a running back drew a flag for unnecessary roughness while running with the ball. Now, he would finish the 1970 season with 193 carries for 874 yards to go with 6 touchdowns. Now, the 1971 campaign was one of the most effective ones in Zonka's career. He would carry the ball 195 times for 1,051 yards and 7 touchdowns. He averaged 5.4 yards a carry, which was a career high for him. He also did not fumble the ball a single time that year. Zonka played a key role in the Dolphins' 17-0 season. He, along with running back Mercury Morris, became the first running back pair to each record 1,000 yards. Zonka had 1,117 yards on 213 carries, while Morris had exactly 1,000. Now, the Dolphins also set an NFL record for rushing yards in a single season with 2,960. Now, Super Bowl VII, which was, of course, the end of that miraculous 1972 season for the Dolphins, showcased Zonka's play style to a T. He would rush for 112 yards on only 15 carries. One play in particular would stand out, though. Zonka broke through a handful of would-be tacklers near the line of scrimmage and turned the play into a long gain. Near the end of the run, a play that had resulted in Miami gaining 49 yards, Zonka was faced with a defender. Instead of trying to avoid the defender, he instead turned towards him and threw a forearm his way. Zonka won that encounter. To describe Zonka's aggressive playing style, the Dolphins offensive line coach Monte Clark stated, quote, "When Zonka goes on a safari, the lions roll up their windows," end quote. Obviously, he was joking, but you get the point. Now, Larry had an equally impressive season in 1973 as he would rush the ball 219 times for 1,009 yards and 5 touchdowns. He really stood out during Super Bowl VIII, though, helping the Dolphins repeat as champions. In this Super Bowl, he proved himself once more in front of a national audience. Zonka would run the ball a then Super Bowl high 33 times for a then Super Bowl record 145 yards, along with scoring a pair of touchdowns. This was an interesting Super Bowl as the Dolphins quarterback, Bob Greasy, only completed 6 passes on 7 attempts as the Dolphins heavily relied on their run game. That was the 70s style of football. So Larry Zonka won Super Bowl MVP for his performance. Now, before we look at Zonka's 1974 season, we have a brief thing to discuss. In the early 1970s, a lot of NFL players were not happy given their contract situations and player safety. As a result, there was a businessman named Gary Davidson, and he decided to try to capitalize on this. He was the founder of both the World Hockey Association and the ABA, which is, of course, an American Basketball Association. So they were both semi-successful leagues. They both hung around for a while. They both still have teams in the NHL and NBA to this day. But what he tried to do is he decided to create the World Football League, WFL, with the intent of having teams across the world. With strikes and a lockout in the NFL looking like a possibility, he decided to push the league forward and started his jumpstart WFL in time for the 1974 season. Now, the new teams had a draft in March of 1974, and teams were allowed to select NFL players. Now, obviously, if you drafted an NFL player, it didn't mean you could have him. It meant that if he ever decides to, leave the NFL and go to the WFL, you have sole rights to negotiate with him. So, obviously, while they were aware that most of these players had little to no chance of coming to their teams, they still decided to take some shots in the dark. Now, Larry Csonka ended up being one of these players that was drafted. In fact, he went second overall. In a surprising move, Csonka, alongside a pair of his teammates named Jim Kiick and Paul Warfield, announced that they intended to sign with the new WFL, effective for the 1975 season. But before this could happen, they were still under contract with the Miami Dolphins for the 1974 season. So Csonka's 1974 season for the Dolphins was good. He carried the ball 197 times for 749 yards to go with 9 touchdowns. Now, after the season came to a close, Csonka and his 2 teammates kept their word, and they left Miami to join the Memphis Southmen of the WFL. While Csonka and the other 2 helped give the league credibility, it was doomed from the start, given its lack of financial resources. Alliance of American Football, anyone? Csonka recorded 99 carries for 421 yards and a single touchdown across half a season before the league would fold. After the league folded, Csonka was a free agent in the NFL as his Miami Dolphins contract had run out. So he decided to sign with the New York Football Giants. Unfortunately, things did not work out for him in New York. This is in part because the Miami Dolphins had one of the best offensive lines in the NFL, and the New York Giants, they did not. So his first year was cut short due to a ligament tear in his knee, and saw him record 569 yards and 4 touchdowns on 160 carries. Now in year 2, which was 1977, this was even worse for Csonka. He recorded 134 carries, but he only got 464 yards and a single touchdown. He found the end zone more in the 1978 season, scoring 6 touchdowns, but other than that, his numbers dropped off significantly, as he would only carry the ball 91 times for 311 yards. After that season, he decided to return to the Dolphins for the 1979 season. He bounced back well there, recording 220 carries for 837 yards and a career-high 12 touchdowns. Like I said in the beginning, though, this was a 16-game season, so it made sense that he did get the career-high in touchdowns to an extent. Now, Csonka, as a result, was named Comeback Player of the Year due to this performance. He decided to hang up his cleats after failing to come to an agreement with Miami on a new contract, and he didn't see the point in going elsewhere. He had tried it failed both times, so he said, you know what, I'm just going to retire if they don't want me. Now, Csonka got to end his career on a high note and on his own terms, which is always a positive. So, his career stats in the NFL were modest but solid. He had 1,891 carries for 8,081 yards to go with 64 touchdowns. He retired a 2-time Super Bowl champion, 1-time Super Bowl MVP, 5-time Pro Bowler, 2-time First Team All-Pro, 1-time Second Team All-Pro, 1-time NFL Comeback Player of the Year, and he is, of course, a crucial marquee player from the Dolphins' undefeated season, which is, of course, the only time any professional sports team in the United States has gone undefeated without any ties. Now, Csonka, he has been active since retirement. He's an avid outdoorsman, and he's hosted a few hunting fishing shows on NBC. He also has been a motivational speaker. Now, in the mid-1980s, Csonka started to frequent Alaska. He soon fell in love with the landscape, and he eventually moved up there, and he still lives there to this day. Now, in 1987, Csonka was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. 2 years later, he was inducted into the College Football Hall of Fame. In 2002, the Dolphins retired Csonka's number of 39. In 2007, Syracuse announced that they would also retire Csonka's number of 39, just like Miami had done a few years prior. So, one thing I do want to discuss before the conclusion is Csonka's friendship with his teammate Jim Kiick. Both players were drafted out of college in 1968, and they became instant friends. They were roommates during training camp, and they both held out in the 1971 season together. They both would go to the WFL in 1975, and these two players, they would be known as Butch Cassidy, Jim Kiick, and the Sundance Kid, Larry Csonka. Already, this was after a movie of that name, so they were even depicted on the cover of Sports Illustrated in 1972. The two would also co-write a book together titled Always on the Run. This book went into details about the Dolphins and what it was like to be a running back in the NFL during the 70s. Kiick and Csonka would remain close friends until Kiick would passed away in June of 2020. So Csonka and him were just very close. I had to mention the friendship. In conclusion, while Csonka may not have had the longevity of other great running backs or fullbacks in the league, his career definitely left an impact. He was one of the toughest players in NFL history. It's alleged that he broke his nose 10 times while playing organized football, and he was known to even stay on the field if blood was pouring out of his nose. Didn't matter to him. He was never one to back down from a tackle either. This man was a freight train on the field. He was beast mode before beast mode. Csonka is a member of the Pro Football and College Football Hall of Fames for a reason. I hope that he enjoys his time being up in Alaska. Now, I also have to note that I chose Larry Csonka because he signifies a fullback to me. Larry Csonka is also very active on social media sites such as Twitter, so you can always give him a follow. I believe it's at Larry Csonka. I could be dead wrong on that. But Larry Csonka is very active on Twitter, and he's also just a very nice guy from what I understand. I've talked to people that have met him in person. They told me he's a great guy to hang out with, especially if you're a hunter or fisher or anything like that. But my dad is a huge Larry Csonka fan. So Larry Csonka always was on my mind when I thought of player bios. But again, I hope you guys enjoyed this. This was the Larry Csonka player bio. Like I said, he may not have been the most impactful running back of his time, but he more than left an impact on the NFL as a whole. Hope you guys enjoyed this. Have a good rest of your day.